Hey, what's up guys? This is Anthony from Anthony's Customs, and for this review, we are looking at the SH Figuarts Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles RAPHAEL. Now you guys know after seeing my Donatello and Leonardo reviews that I think these figures are pretty darn good. And the interesting thing is that they are all like 95% the same exact figure, so there's not going to be a whole lot of new stuff to talk about, but I'm going to give you a quick rundown of all of the articulation and the pros and cons and the accessories so that you'll be able to decide if you want to buy them if you haven't seen the other reviews, or if you're just going to cherry pick the turtle you like. So let's go ahead and get him off the stand and take a closer look. This guy stands just about 5 3/4 inches tall, which makes him just about 14.5 centimeters, right around there. And that's interesting because that's actually pretty well scaled with like your standard 6-inch figure. They should be slightly shorter, and they are. So if you wanted to mix and match your collections, these guys would be good for doing that. As far as paint on these guys, we really don't have very much. Everything is pretty much molded. Some of the few parts that are painted well enough. It's nice and clean. You can see the eyes. They look okay. We're not looking at any googly eyes. They're maybe not perfectly centered, but definitely good enough. And the whites are painted well. The R on his belt is painted well enough. And the shell is painted well enough. Interestingly enough, there is a paint issue with the belt, which you would think it's not that big of a deal, but this piece right here does not match the rest of the belt, and that's true of the accessory also, so it's kind of a bummer. But it's on the back, so it's not the biggest deal, but it's worth noting. Last thing I want to mention about paint is that the lower legs are die cast. I think actually the belt is too, but who cares? The buckle part anyway. The lower legs and feet are die cast, which is usually problematic for paint. It can chip easily, and it's often hard to match paint with molded plastic, but they did a pretty exceptional job matching the molded green with the painted green. It's very nicely executed, and having the heavy die-cast parts for the lower legs will help with balancing and posing. Okay, before we talk about the figure anymore, let's talk about the accessories. We do have two interchangeable heads. One is the standard head with the closed mouth, and one is the action head with the open mouth. And they're both sculpted very nicely. Unfortunately, the bandana is just the one bandana, and it has to be switched between the two, and it's not posable. It just tabs in, which is very disappointing because it could have easily been a ball peg to let it move around, and they didn't do that. It's very, very disappointing for me. We do have a few different hands. We have the two fist hands that come on him in the package. We have two gripping hands for the size and the kunai. We have two gripping hands for the shuriken or throwing star. And then we have two open style pose hands for just martial arts poses. We do have the kunai and the shuriken, as I mentioned, which are both nicely detailed. They look pretty good. And we have his two sais, which are very nicely detailed. I like the paint job and the sculpt. Unfortunately, one of my sais was warped in the packaging, and I'm not sure if that's the kind of plastic that'll take a little bit of heat to fix it. So hopefully that is the case, though. And then lastly, we have the interchangeable belt piece, which will allow him to hold his sais on the back of his belt. Again, the painting is not the best. They don't quite match up, so it's a little bit of a bummer. Okay, moving back to the figure. Like I said, the paints are pretty good. I will say, I think the shells could be a little bit more brown. I know they are supposed to be this kind of olivey color, but to me they look a little bit off, but it's definitely not a big deal. And then the sculpts are fantastic. I love the sculpts all the way around on these guys. I think they're phenomenal. Very organic looking. I love the musculature. I love a lot of it. And the articulation helps that a lot because it's, for the most part, really good. So let's run the articulation real quick. We have a ball peg for the head and a ball peg for the neck. So the only real limitation you're going to have is bumping the cheeks into this top shoulder neck area, which obviously they can't do anything about. But you can move the head around pretty flawlessly every other direction. So I think that's fine. I think that's really good, actually. Now, the shoulders on these guys, if you haven't seen my other reviews, they're maybe the best shoulders Figuarts has ever done. They are phenomenal. I love them. We have a butterfly joint, which lets the arm come out horizontally like that. It just flings out a little bit. Not a ton, but definitely enough. And it's worth noting that the shell is softer plastic, so it can get kind of squished around if you need it to. But the butterfly joint is a two-part joint, so it comes out horizontally like that, and then you can see this little like half circle right there. That's actually another joint that lets the arm raise up. It's not entirely necessary, but it does help, and it allows the arm to come up even farther than horizontal by a lot. And it still looks pretty good. I mean, sure, there are some guts in there, that's gonna happen, but there's no huge gaps or anything, and I think that's just great. I mean, look at that range, just raising the arm up, no problem at all. And on top of that vertical butterfly, we do have the ball peg, which the arm connects to. It has just a tiny bit of play in there, but that ball peg leads into the true hinge, which is standard shoulder joint, but it all works so nicely together. You can raise the arm, you can move it around, you can rotate it around and bring it around this way. It's just a very nicely executed, very well conceptualized and executed shoulder joint. Really great range. It's a little stiff, but not so stiff that it's going to be a problem, and stiff enough that it's going to hold any pose you want it to, so that's good. As you can see, we have our true bicep swivel, which is just fine, not much to say about that. A double jointed elbow, which works really well. We get better than 90 degrees, and it looks good all the way around. I don't know what happened. I mean, with the Figuarts, we often get really good designs or designs that feel like they were kind of only halfway executed, halfway thought out. This is like phenomenal. I don't know why they don't just do this kind of engineering on all their figures. Actually, I do know why, and we'll talk about that at the end. Hopefully I remember. So double jointed elbow is good. We have a standard ball hinge wrist, so it'll swivel at both ends and has the hinge. However, it's very deeply seated into the palm of the hand, so you don't have the best range, but I think it'll be good enough. We do have a ball peg. It might technically be a double ball peg for the torso, or for the shell. I don't really see a need for it. I mean, you can move it around and it will allow for a little bit extra posability in some cases, but I didn't even mention it in my other reviews because I don't get why it's there. It doesn't really do much, but this has a ball peg that connects it to the torso. We have a waist twist, technically. It's pretty well hidden under the belt here, but there's a split from, well, there's a waist twist in there. That's probably all you need to know. You're not going to really use it that much underneath everything, but there you go. Now, for the hips, it's pretty standard SH Figuarts design. We have that hinged ball peg in there. It does pull down. You can actually see the hinge in there a little bit. It doesn't, I mean, it works pretty well, but it doesn't actually afford, this piece falls off, by the way. It keeps falling off. It's kind of a pain in the ass. It doesn't afford that much more range. So, I mean, it's nice that it's there. It doesn't hurt the figure at all. Just be aware that the hips are going to be somewhat limited, and they're very stiff, so be careful with that. We do have our thigh swivel in there, so that's good. So let's see what kind of range we can actually get. Let's drop the hip all the way down and bring it out to the side. Yeah, I don't think that's too bad. I like that. It's definitely better than most figures these days, so that's good. And we have this floating piece in here, which just hides the articulation, which I really appreciate. I don't like having big gaps. He doesn't have any big gaps. So let's see if we can move the legs forward and back at all. They go back a little bit, not very far at all. And don't worry about being able to see through there. That's only when you drop the legs all the way down. And then bringing the leg forward, let's see. It goes forward, not quite all the way, but I think that's pretty good. And the shell does bunch. It bunches in kind of a weird way, I think, due to the belt, but I guess it'll do. Once you pose them, you might be able to hide that a little bit. So, you know, it's not bad. It's not the best in the world, but it's definitely good enough, especially given the fact that they have thick legs and shells. I think Figuarts did a pretty good job with that. For the knees, we just have a double jointed knee, which works very similarly to the elbow. Very well designed again. I love that they filled in the gaps. The joints are where they belong. They're not like off-centered or anything like that. Very, very well designed. Now for the ankles, we just have kind of like a double ball peg situation, which isn't the best. You're not going to get very much range at all out of the foot. Almost no ankle rocker at all. Going forward and back, it's not bad, but it's not good. I don't know what happened. Like it was good up to here, and then the ankle just kind of fell flat. And I'm guessing because it's die cast, they decided to do it differently, but it just doesn't really work. The best thing is that it rotates, but you don't really want that. So I'm not sure what happened there. Then we do have a toe hinge, which is actually not too bad. It works pretty well. It's nice and stiff, and that's a good thing. So one last thing to note is to be careful because posing the ankle could potentially scratch the paint off the die cast. It's not likely, but it could happen, so just be aware of that. Now, the last thing I want to mention on this figure, which I very briefly touched on, let's see if I can put that back on the right way, is that these guys are all the same mold for the most part. We have a few tiny differences throughout the figures, and some people are complaining about that. The reason that is okay by me is because the money they would have spent on making the figures different, they spent on the engineering. And like I said, the shoulders, the elbows, the knees, the hips, everything is so, other than the ankles, is so well engineered. It makes up for the fact that we're getting basically 4 of the same figure for a fairly high price point. I think that's because they dumped all of their money into making these quality figures, and I'm very happy about that. Sure, I would have appreciated a posable bandana and different things, but I think for what these are, they are very good, and I'm very happy to have it, and I definitely recommend them to you. So if you want to pick one up, they are available at Big Bad Toy Store. You should probably get them. I think the only one that's not out yet there is Mikey, but it'll be coming soon. So go ahead and check that link in the description below. And I suggest you also subscribe to the channel because I have new videos up every single day. We talk about action figures, movies, TV shows, video games, all kinds of fun stuff. So make sure you do that. Make sure you click that little bell button to turn on notifications. And in the meantime, keep collecting.